masking. That is a term being thrown around quite a lot recently, isn't it? It is most often used within the context of autism, when someone on the spectrum is encouraged to hide their symptoms and pass off as normal, thus putting a significant part of oneself behind a mask. It can also be used with other mental disorders. Depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and of course, trauma of all kinds can be put behind a mask. Now, it goes without saying that everybody masks. Even you neurotypicals with your relative normie brains. A BIPOC uses their white voice. A member of the LGBTQA+ community hides in a closet, or if they're out of a closet, they're encouraged not to make it their entire personality, whatever that means. A man hides his feelings, and a woman hides her desire to strangle you because she has a degree in this and you don't. Shut the hell up, Steve. And lest we forget, gamers tragically live in a society. This video is going to require a little bit of honesty. We're going to have to talk about why we mask. My first bit of honesty. This video is going to be painfully specific. And while I will try to touch upon the experiences of everyone on the spectrum, the insecurities I am going to go over are, for the most part, very masculine and a very much cis-het and, more unconsciously, white sort of way. Because those are my insecurities. For example, I have trouble telling between being pressured to mask my feelings because I am a man or because I have autism. So I have come to wonder, what is the overlap? Where do the expectations of being a man overlap with the expectations of autism? As it turns out, masculinity and autism have always been weirdly linked into social consciousness. The relic I was wearing bore a blue puzzle piece, which is harmful and ignorant for two reasons. First and foremost is a puzzle piece itself. The implication being that a person with autism is incomplete, something is missing, and that we are not fully human, or perhaps that people with autism must be solved like a puzzle. But we can't be solved. We are people, not puzzles. Treat us as people, please. Would be nice. Sorry, got a little carried away there. Yes. And the second reason it is problematic is the color of the puzzle piece. The blue coloring is associated with the belief that those with autism simply possess a hyper-masculine brain. And to understand that belief, we have to look at how autism is portrayed in the media, as well as a certain scientific theory with a very misleading name and its many misconceptions. Let's get into this, shall we? The norm in media is directed by the dominant hegemony, which is in turn directed by the dominant vectors of identity. If that sounds like gobbledygook, I'll de-gobbledygook it a bit. In a white, cis-het, allistic male dominates society, the norm is white cishet allistic men. Thus, this makes up most prominent characters in media. Deviations from this norm typically happen in baby steps. You might be gay, but not black and gay. You might be brown, but not brown and trans. You might be asexual, but a robot. And if you are disabled in any way, but particularly if the disability is neurological in nature, you probably check all the other privilege boxes. To portray any of the other countless identities that exist in the real world is unrealistic, because realism actually means only my power fantasy is allowed. Needless to say, baby, I'm a wreck. Needless to say, autism and autistic-coded characters in media have been frequently weaponized for a very particular kind of toxic male power fantasy. Enter the insufferable genius trope, stage far right, with characters such as Dr. House on the TV show House, and Sherlock Holmes on the British show Sherlock, and Rick from Rick and Morty being notable examples. The fantasy that is being sold with the insufferable genius boils down to getting away with being an asshole because you're so much better and smarter than everyone else. This trope is applied almost exclusively to characters who are white men, who are frequently either coded or outright stated to be autistic. A disability is thereby used as a power fantasy for those with privilege. This, in turn, feeds into the idea that autism is a white male disease and furthers the invisibility of women, people of color, and LGBTQ+ folks with autism. At the same time, a very specific brand of masculinity is further glorified, and along with it, toxic ideas of what it means to be autistic. Here comes Dick Spock, the man that can solve anything. So for starters, this trope runs on a fundamental misunderstanding of autism, being that autistic people lack empathy, and when they infodump, they're just trying to prove how much smarter and better they are. Superpower to make up for that. However, coming back to that puzzle piece, without that superpower, one is simply less than human. This honestly should surprise no one who lives in a culture wherein no one has any inherent value beyond their ability to provide or withhold goods and services, or provide nothing while having money. But it is far more noticeable if you don't have money and your brain is wrong.
Now, some misconceptions of gender and autism may have stemmed from a particular scientific study, regrettably titled Extreme Male Brain Theory, because even my disability has to have a gender role. Thanks, Obama. Though the theory began in the mid-90s, when British researchers Simon Baron Cohen decided that correlation equaled causation. Okay, that's a bit mean. But he incorporated tests of social intelligence and pattern recognition that had been used to find differences in the behavior of men and women. No idea why anyone in the UK would be following that line of research. So in these experiments, first allistic men and women, then autistic men and women would be tested for their abilities to emphasize and systemize. Just as an aside, when I refer to men and women within the context of this experiment, assume I am referring to cisgender men and women. This is Turf Island in the 90s, after all. The results were then compounded into D scores, with high D score, signifying you're better at systemizing than empathizing, and a low D score, meaning the opposite. Allistic men tended to have a higher D score than allistic women, whereas autistic men and women had consistently higher D scores than both the cisgenders. I would also like to clarify that cognitive empathy, one's ability to realize what someone is going through via context-clues social cues, and affectionate empathy, ability to emotionally respond appropriately to someone else's situation, are two separate things. And it was only cognitive empathy that was measured for these experiments. Also, all of these results only function on a group level. On an individual level, anything goes. So, based on these results, what can we actually tell? Not much, I'm afraid. If autistics have a higher D score, does that really make them more male? Well, no, it doesn't. Is a D score the singular thing that defines gender? Oh my god! Someone call the turf police. We have just found the single determinator of gender. It's all about that D score. For you GCs out there, D score is like a Hufflepuff or some shit. Discworld enjoyers don't want you to know this. But gender has been solved. You can stop thinking about it, stop inspecting people's genitals, and stop installing MRI machines in front of public bathrooms. Now we have an even more bullshit, convoluted way to determine people's gender. I'm so glad I found out about D scores. Well, no. You see, according to a 2019 study conducted at Western University, which is a thing Canadians name their universities, testosterone has no effect on cognitive empathy, and there is no concrete evidence that autistics have an overabundance of testosterone in the first place. While currently unproven, it is very likely that the difference in D score between allistic cisgender men and women is the result of socialization as opposed to anything biological. Masking is, of course, a facet of socialization, and men being socialized to be less empathetic and more systemic in their thinking may cause autism to be more recognizable in men. This in turn shapes our common perception of autism. The difficulty with cognitive empathy helps us understand why autistics are seen by allistics as lacking empathy as a whole. There's a false assumption that the way empathy presents itself is a monolith. Conversely, among some circles, presenting empathy at all is seen as undesirable. After all, what kind of loser opens up to others, or even themselves? So, that's a masculinity mask, right? One hides the emotional state of themselves, the fears, the insecurities, the sorrows, ostensibly, because those emotions get in the way of logic or reason. But what's really hiding behind the mask is vulnerability. Men are socialized to possess greater systemic intelligence than cognitive empathy because they have been socialized into thinking that's the only form of intelligence they need. Matters of the heart can be solved with facts and logic, and that has to be the case because the alternative would be taking that mask off? Why do I struggle to get a relationship? Because you need to be an alpha. What is the meaning of life? Fulfilling Jungian archetypes. How can I be happy? Rise to the top of the dominance hierarchy. Any solution, no matter how absurd, as long as you can keep that mask on. Now, like everyone in the world, I'm a person with a multitude of problems, one of which is a form of imposter syndrome that I think came about partially because of a disconnect between my actual accomplishments and my perception of those accomplishments through the lens of masculinity. I like to think of myself as a good writer, a deep thinker, compassionate if I kicked myself. But I also undersell those qualities about myself because I have not checked these boxes over here, i.e. sex, relationship status, driving. I cannot really think of myself as accomplished. Therefore, anything I am good at has to be a fluke because I'm a failure, right? That's who I am. And that is the kind of problem that can't be solved with reason. You cannot Spock your way out of it because it is irrational. I just explained all of the reasons why I don't need to compare myself to standards of masculinity and neurotypicality, yet here I am still doing it. That's a little scary, isn't it? It's almost eldritch. Reason won't save you from Cthulhu, and it won't save you from self-doubt or crippling loneliness either. No wonder so many men are scared. No wonder they look at figures like Jordan Peterson with his clinical diagnoses of Jungian archetypes and think, good, I can solve this. And it's ridiculous, this talk of alpha, beta, omega males. And it has to be ridiculous because it is an attempt at using reason to solve problems of the heart. But we can't be solved. We are people, not puzzles. Treat yourself as a person, please.